Continuing on with the Clone Wars, I hopped on over to the next arc in the list, the Battle of Umbara, starting with Season 4, Episode 7, Darkness of Umbara. I originally planned on sitting down and watching all 4 episodes in a row. William Aguilar, the movie critic dude, a bunch of people told me that I should watch this arc in that way, back to back to back to back, because it kind of watches like a movie. Unfortunately, I could only watch the first 2. It's kind of difficult to do things like that and plan and schedule with a baby daughter who's very demanding. So I appreciate everybody's patience. Cool? Cool. The Separatists have taken over vital supply routes. Republic forces punch through it and move to control the strategic system of Umbara. We open up on Obi-Wan and Anakin strategizing, organizing. The Umbarans have aligned themselves with the Separatists. This opening scene was the perfect setup for this episode. It was short and sweet, but we got a taste of tactical decisions. Obi-Wan laying out a plan, fast and decisive. Here it is, let's get it done. The Republic forces are hoping that the Umbara capital will surrender once their invasion sweeps through. They're invading a world that has aligned themselves with their enemy. They're not a part of the big bad droid armies that we're so used to, but rather they're a part of a confederacy, an alliance of thousands of systems, that's what the Separatists are, that form a secession movement trying to break away from the Republic. The Republic forces are kind of the aggressors here in a way. They're invading a sovereign system who has chosen to break away. I have a feeling as this arc progresses, that ethical dilemma will be explored, as it has in previous episodes and arcs. What I love about the Clone Wars is how it takes our notions of black and white, good and evil, and shows us that there's a large gray area. An area where right and wrong get a little murky, where the ethical and moral lines are a little blurred. This episode easily contains my favorite grand scale action in the entire series so far. The initial invasion sequence is pulled straight out of World War II bombing runs and Vietnam troop deployments. Flak shells detonate all around the Republic ships. Entire groups of clones are lost before even getting close to the surface. It is a tactic of overload with overwhelming manpower, hoping the enemy just can't keep up. Throw enough at them and they'll eventually cave. I thought the initial invasion sequence was so well done. There were stages to it, deploying AT-RT forces on the ground first, destroying enemy armor, hoping to clear the way for foot soldiers. It was great. The personalities of individual clone troops shine through beat by beat, and they are even more pronounced as this episode moves forward. We see personalities, we see individual characteristics. I love it. The troops land, Rex and Anakin lead the way. There's a sense of doom and gloom. The landscape is dark and dreary, mysterious and uninviting. The vegetation ripe for enemy ambush. 2 clones, Fives and Hardcase, almost get gobbled up by a giant Venus flytrap looking thing. One of them, I can't remember which, it might have been Hardcase. I think anyway, one of them steps on what they think is just a lowly old vine, but it turns out to be a part of a large plant. The following sequence was chaotic. I think it was Fives who was able to toss a thermal detonator into its mouth, killing the plant. I love the way the camera moves in this episode. There are a lot of large-scale sweeping shots of the battlefield, moving from troop to troop, showing the scale and scope of the conflict, spliced in with intense close-up shots. And at one point there was even kind of a POV shot from the perspective of a firing clone. Sometimes with these Clone Wars battles, they don't do a good job showing the viewer how large the fight actually is. Instead they kind of focus on one aspect of the battle. Sometimes you don't really get a sense of the scale. This episode, on the other hand, this episode does an amazing job visually explaining the extent of the struggle ahead. An example of the episode really nailing home the scale and scope of this battle is when we see Anakin and Rex holding their position and watching from afar, flak, flickers, and explosions off in the distance. They're watching Obi-Wan's group of soldiers in combat from their vantage point, a distant battle on the horizon, a very common occurrence in real-world scenarios in real-world war. And in this episode, it was a really nice break from the in-your-face action, while still showing us that, despite us not being front and center in the battle, the war is still raging on. Like I said, it was a nice moment to breathe, but it also was a nice moment to hear some banter and conversation between Rex and Anakin, a relationship that I love seeing, and one that I'm guessing will be really strained as the series progresses. So, while Anakin and Rex are chit-chatting, the troops are taking a little rest, waiting for orders. Umbaran troops launch an ambush, beginning with a spidery little silverfish type robot bug thingy, which I thought was goofy. I mean, if your goal is a surprise attack, a full-on ambush, don't send out the silverfish robot. It put everyone on high alert and allowed time for the clones to quickly get ready. Maybe that's nitpicky, but it's the only thing in this episode that I didn't really like. It wasn't a necessary component at all. I think the overall ambush scene would have been way more powerful if we were just watching Rex and Anakin converse, and then all of a sudden blaster fire starts pelting the troops just out of nowhere. No hint to the audience that an ambush was about to commence, leaving the audience equally as stunned as the troops. A surprise attack for both the clones and the audience. Get rid of that silly, goofy, dumb silverfish robot. It was unnecessary. An airstrike is ordered. I loved it. This was an awesome moment. All the clone troops begin to move out and find a safe position. They're trying to get out of the kill zone of the incoming bombing run. Republic ships zoom overhead and pepper the area where the Umbaran troops are, which was one of my favorite moments of this episode. It showed how dynamic the battlefield was, and that it's a bigger conflict than just what we're seeing. And of course, the real-world application of calling an airstrike certainly comes into play, and you all know how I love my real-world comparisons. A general and Jedi master by the name of Krell drops down on the surface near Anakin's position and tells Anakin that he's been ordered to leave immediately and head to Coruscant, and these orders came straight from the Supreme Chancellor. Krell is taking over Anakin's position on the battlefield. Krell is a hard-ass, the kind of leader that doesn't get much respect from the men because he doesn't give much respect to the men he leads, if that makes sense, especially when it comes to clones, because they're clones. It can be easy to not identify them as individuals when they're kind of a collective thing, and that seems to be how Krell views them, as disposable means to an end, giving orders that seem like suicide. This turn of events is a good one, an interesting one. The unit's leader, Anakin, is gone, and new leadership has taken its place. The clones don't know Krell. He's like the new kid at school or the substitute teacher. You don't know their rules and you don't know their methods of command. You're just not used to it. You just don't know. So it'll be an interesting learning experience for everyone involved. I'm excited to see where it leads. But I really like the concept of removing a leader and putting a new leader in who no one is familiar with. The troops have been on the move for 12 hours non-stop at a fast pace. Rex tries to tell Krell that the men need some rest. Krell, of course, disagrees. He goes on a long monologue about how time is of the essence and how rest is not a luxury the Republic can afford, all that kind of stuff. While it was a good monologue, and while he does make some solid points, it definitely did not boost the morale of the troops, and did not give Rex confidence in the new leadership. At this point, I kind of started wondering about fragging. I was wondering if a clone would frag Krell. I doubt it, but it would be really interesting. The definition of fragging is the deliberate killing or attempted killing by a soldier of a fellow soldier, usually a superior officer or non-commissioned officer. This is something that happens in war sometimes. Soldiers disagree with methods. Soldiers think orders are likely to get them killed. Maybe a soldier is slated to go home in like a couple weeks, and some gung-ho lieutenant wanting to impress his superiors volunteers his men, his unit, for every mission. And when the mission looks like suicide and you're just counting the days until death or until you go home, it can sometimes happen. It's interesting to look into it. It doesn't happen often. It doesn't happen often at all. But I'm wondering if something dark like that could come into play in the Clone Wars. I doubt it. I highly doubt it. But it would be really, really interesting. Krell changes the original plan of attack. Everyone's confused. What the hell is this guy doing? He says they're gonna go down the main road, just straight up the middle. No surprise attack like what was originally planned for. No sneaking around, just literally walk up the street in plain view with no cover. This is the great general that everyone was impressed with? Seems like the actions and orders of a man without a plan. Kinda seems like the actions of a really shitty strategist. Hey, you know how all the enemy guns are trained on this obvious main vein that leads straight into the capital? Yeah, let's just walk right into them. I liked this aspect of the show because it showed a major level of incompetence in leadership, a major lack of caring for your soldiers' well-being. One of my favorite parts of the show was when these orders were given and we see the troops walking slowly down the street. They're talking amongst themselves, bickering, debating, questioning, or agreeing. Some say Krell knows what he's doing, let's trust him, and they should trust his judgment. Some think that these orders are insane. I thought this was a really great moment to not only show the individuality of the clones, but also to show that there's often major disagreements within the ranks. Ultimately, the clones are ambushed. Landmines, close quarters in-your-face shots. Rex a few times is able to point-blank blast an Umbaran troop in the face. It was brutal. An Umbaran troop's helmet is cracked, slowly dies. Rex puts him out of his misery. It was brutal, but it was great. I thought this ambush scene was fantastic. Maybe the best action sequence in the entire show. It showed the absolute chaotic nature of being ambushed by enemy forces, how there's confusion and fear, and it showed how a good leader keeps their shit together and leads. And that's what Rex does. He keeps his shit together and leads, and they fall back. In the end, Krell reprimands and scolds Rex for not continuing to push forward like he ordered. He's pissed that he didn't follow his orders, but Rex, risking everything, stands up to Krell, tells him he had to do what he had to do. He had to save his men. He tells Krell that his orders were suicide, and this actually seemed to impress Krell, or at least give Krell a little, maybe respect for Rex. The episode ends with them being attacked, a little in-action cliffhanger. I thought this episode was so well paced. The action easily, to me, is the best in the series so far because it wasn't just boom boom bang for the sake of boom boom bang. It had some strategy and tactics to it. We heard from the grunts, which I always enjoy. In the Clone Wars, I always enjoy hearing from the clones themselves. It made combat feel intimate because we spend some time with the troops. If I had to guess, we'll dive into some ethical questions as this arc progresses. At least I hope so. There could be a lot of interesting moral dilemmas to dissect in this arc. As so many of you have told me, the Umbara arc is basically the Vietnam of the Clone Wars. And so far, it seems like that's the perfect way to describe it. I'm excited. On to the next episode. HelloGreedo, out.